Hey, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you for calling me for the interview. It's great. This is the first interview I've done for this book, so you're kind of my test ground.
I'll happily be your guinea pig.
Well, my
um,
pleasure.
my first question is: have you ever owned a Ouija board?
No, I have never owned a Ouija board, although I did play with them in childhood. My aunt had one, and kind of fascinating.
I wonder because there's something because as a kid I played with one too, and there's something kind of spiritual about touching it and having something that is not part of the dimension in which we live potentially move it around the board. So I'm going to jump off, springboard from that, as it were, to just ask you what inspired you to tell this story specifically.
Well, the story behind the story is kind of a long story. This is my third novel, and although it's coming out now, I had the idea for this book quite a long time ago before I actually started writing fiction. I worked in a thrift store part-time when I was in university, and before that experience, I had read some time travel novels in my teenage years. So I read Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. And I read A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. And both of those made me think that someday I would like to write a time travel story. So when I got the job in the thrift store, then this idea occurred to me that what if I was touching an object, kind of like the Ouija board that you mentioned, that would enable me to travel in time. Now, this was just a kind of a fleeting thought
Mm-hmm.
more time, but it stayed in my mind over the years. And finally, 2013 or so, I got a chance to start writing this story, and that was where it began.
And we talk about time specifically, and I don't want to give too much away in regard to the plot, but the character of Cass occupies kind of a unique space in time, I thought, anyway. Paradoxically, she is already the beneficiary of the technological revolution that is brought about by figures like Thomas Edison, who appears in your novel. But so not only to touch on the elliptical narrative and where that idea came from, but you cite specific time periods, 1983, for example, and 1900. What appealed to you about those time periods?
Well, 1983, I guess, would be just, coming from my own experience. That was around the time that I was a young person, kind of the same age as Cass. As far as 1900 goes, I feel like that is a fascinating period in time as far as technological advances go. There were so many advances in technology at that time. We're talking about homes being outfitted with electricity. We're talking about radio. We're talking about, the infancy of film and broadcasting, not to mention all of the advances in medicine and physics. So it was a time when there were a lot of things going on, and in a way 1983 is kind of similar to that, because there were all these technological advances going on. People were having, computers in their home and all kinds of things like that. So
Hmm.
there are definitely some parallels between those two eras. Yeah.
And it's fascinating because you could have actually set the 1983 segment and the segment that happens previously and the events of Cass's life in New York, for example. Is there a particular reason why you chose Calgary?
Well, I've lived in Calgary for a very, very long time, since I was 11 years old. It just seems like a natural place to start a story for me because I've lived here for so long.
Well, kudos to you for supporting the Canadian cause and specifically, exploring Calgary, the nooks and crannies of Calgary in the context of your story. And so, who is the book for? Who would you like to see pick it up and, keep it in their back pocket, riding on the bus or whatever?
I would like to see anyone read it. I think my aim in this book was to maybe look at people who are interested in accessible literary fiction, because I kind of think literary fiction in Canada has a little bit of an image problem. I think in the eyes of many readers, it's seen as dull and difficult intellectual writing. And I really hope, and I'm pretty sure that Flickr is none of those things. Um, we know that more accessible commercial fiction far outsells literary fiction. And yet in this country, the publishing culture is predominantly literary. There's not really very much commercial fiction published
Mm.
here. So I feel like there's a gap. If we have, more accessible literary fiction, I think we're going to be able to reach that audience that usually is reading commercial fiction. And I think of people like Suzette Mayer,
Yeah.
who won the Giller Prize last year for The Sleeping Car Porter. I talked to people who read this book, and they were surprised at how accessible and engaging the writing was. And they were so impressed that, yes, people can write accessible and engaging stories that take place in Canada.
And like Suzette's book, there's something of sweetly salacious in little pockets of your book as well in Flickr. Well, thanks for bringing that to us, the book. It's released on the 15th of September. Do you have a public reading planned or any public readings?
Yes, I do. I'm going to be launching the book at Memorial Park Library in Calgary on September 28th. And then the
Fantastic.
following week, I'm doing a reading at Owl's Nest Books with my friends Astrid Blodgett and Steve Passy.
Wow, fantastic. That's great. Well, I'm really excited for you and for your book to be unleashed to the world. Congratulations on that.
Thanks so much, Tony. It's been a pleasure talking to you.